Hey, so we have a whole bunch of news to catch up on. We got Kenny Willekes going on IR, we have Jonathan Bullard coming in to replace him, and we have a weird thing with Ed Ingram's contract. But actually, for most of the show, I want to talk about football becoming fun again in Minnesota. Bear with me on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at LukeBraunNFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Today on the show, we got a bunch of odds and ends to go over. So we'll start with that. I'll get the newsy stuff, the stuff you came for out of the way. But mostly, I tricked you, all right? You didn't know it, but we're talking about Les Steckel today. Look, the Les Steckel year is something of a thing of legend in Minnesota, and I want you to know that legend a little better than you do. You probably know about it, but I don't think you know enough about it. So we're going to talk about that. But first, let's go into the news of the weekend. And I want to start with Kenny Willekes, who ends up on IR. The Vikings signed a replacement defensive end in Jonathan Bullard, who was with the Bears for a couple of years when Vic Fangio was there, and then he sort of has bounced around the league, so he's kind of one of those long shot, like one of those maybe on the roster, maybe priority practice squad types that doesn't make the 53, but he's like basically on the team because he's on the practice squad and he gets activated a bunch. Maybe one of those types of guys, but really, Kenny Willekes going on IR, he was actually waived injured, then reverts to IR, which is like a different kind of waiver. But it basically means that's like a season-ending kind of IR. That's not the kind of IR where he can come back week 8 or whatever. He is now no longer eligible to play football in the 2022 season. So I'm going to guess that it was some kind of really bad practice injury, some knee torn up kind of thing, and now he's going to have to like rehab for the whole year. And you kind of hope he can come back next year and maybe try to make the team. But for now, he's going to have to just go on the back burner and be pretty much out of everybody else's mind. That really sucks. You know, he had that same thing in his rookie year. He broke his leg in college. He's had a lot of injury issues. And I mean, maybe that's the reason. If you remember Kenny Willekes in it was the 2020 draft, right? He was supposed to be like a 3rd round pick, and he fell all the way to round like 7. And everybody was like, what? And when we drafted Willekes, people were like, what a steal. I wonder why he fell. And he did have the history of a broken leg, and maybe teams figured that would be a bigger risk, and now that risk is sort of borne out. And like that could be the case. It could just be like horrific luck too. Sometimes it is. It could be on the other leg, like who knows. But either way, that's rough. We probably won't ever find out what the injury is until somebody decides to let a reporter talk about it. But Jonathan Bullard will now come in, and he probably just like 1-for-1 takes over the spot where Kenny Willekes was. And Bullard is going to be a cleaner scheme fit because he's been in the Fangio scheme before. So if you want to know how they plan on using that kind of player, I would say go look at 2018 Bears tape and look at where Jonathan Bullard lined up. But I also want to quick touch on a thing that came out from Chris Thomason that I totally missed. It came out on, I think, Thursday, that Ed Ingram has not signed his rookie contract. A few rookies haven't signed their contract yet. It's super not weird to have not signed your rookie contract yet. I think there's 3 left for the Vikings. There's a whole bunch of like scattered ones. I think like more than half of them have signed now, but we are still kind of going through that and teams are still processing them. But Thomason tweets out something really cryptic, like he's not close to signing his rookie contract, which is like a weird thing to tweet and to insinuate. Look, Thomason will do this. He'll take innocuous situations and he'll like make them seem like really contentious things to get his clickbaity piece for the day. Like that's just how he works. So it just like based on the source, it's not. I don't think it's a reason to panic. Like he will make mountains out of molehills sometimes, but it's also just a very weird thing to say because there's not like a lot of rookie contract like negotiation. There's not a lot of space to negotiate in a rookie contract. The amounts are more or less locked in. There's like tiny little bits of wiggle room. There's little clauses in the contract like Roquan Smith held out a few years ago despite all this because of offset language. And that meant, and it didn't come up because Roquan Smith was good and the Bears never cut him. But if he had gotten cut, it would have like changed how his free agency went. What offset language is like if you get cut, then it will decide like who pays out the rest of your guaranteed money. Like if you're cut and you have $500,000 of guaranteed money left, and then another team goes and signs you in some contracts because of the offset language, the other team will like pick up that guaranteed money and it's their cap burden now. And that's actually a negotiable thing in rookie contracts. And for whatever reason, Roquan Smith really didn't want to budge on that, or his agent didn't really want to budge on that. So it could be something like that. With Ingram, if I had to guess, it'd probably have something to do with all the off-field stuff that we talked about. Maybe there's a clause or something that is in the contract that can void guarantees if he has a certain violation of the conduct policy, and maybe Ingram's camp doesn't like that or something like that. That would be my guess, but that's a total guess, shot in the dark. It's also just like way too early to panic about that. Ed Ingram has been a full participant in all things with an injury insurance like program, which is standard practice for if you need to do OTAs and you don't have your contract signed yet. You basically take out an insurance policy. So if you get hurt, you get money anyways. And it essentially makes it so that you can't like draft a player and then not sign them to the rookie contract if they get hurt in OTAs. So that's all standard practice and going normally. Like no action taken with Ingram has been out of the norm yet. And it's just kind of a weird thing that insinuates some contentious dynamic, although he could sign his contract like, I don't know, next week. He's not close to signing it. He could sign it next month and that would still be super normal. So definitely no reason to panic yet. And I'm sure this is the kind of thing that gets worked out easy. But I don't know, something to keep looking at out of the side of your eye. But look, that's all boring, all right? This is boring stuff, and I want to bring the fun back. And to bring the fun back, who better to talk about than the person who took it all out? And that's Les Steckel. So I'm going to talk about the Les Steckel year and what we can learn from it, how we can apply it to this team. But also, I think we just need to know more about the Les Steckel year. So let's do that. But first things first, let me talk to you about Blue Nile. Blue Nile is the original online jeweler. It is the 21st century, y'all. And so if you are trying to get something special for that special someone, like an engagement ring or just a gift for a birthday or an anniversary, or just doing something nice for someone who's special to you, go to BlueNile.com. You can customize things. You can work with someone. They have 24/7 jewelry experts on hand, available via phone or chat to help you find exactly what you are looking for. And this is important to me, they use the Kimberly process, which is like the industry standard for the diamond industry process that vets all of their diamonds and their diamond suppliers to make sure that they're not getting like conflict diamonds. And they apply that to their gold and their silver and everything, because that industry is wrought with a whole bunch of human rights nonsense. And it's always good to check to make sure you're not buying into that. With Blue Nile, you're good there. So make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Vikings listeners get $50 off of purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. So use promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON. That's code LOCKEDON, all one word. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. I also want to talk to you about your car. Look, you should have all the essential safety stuff in your car. At this point, listening to this show, you should have it. But if you don't, go to rockauto.com. I'm talking jumper cables. I'm talking a tire kit. I'm talking an ice scraper for the winter months. All of that stuff, even just stuff like a flashlight and whatever safety supply you need, you can find it at rockauto.com. You can find anything there that you would find at a brick and mortar auto parts store. But they're not going to upcharge you for the overhead that a brick and mortar store requires. Rock Auto is just aggregating links for you to buy stuff directly from manufacturers, and they're using their relationships and connections that they built in over 15 years doing this to have the most insane catalog of parts you could ever even dream of. So head on over to rockauto.com. Why pay 30, 50, even 100% more for those car parts like a brick and mortar shop is going to charge you for? No. Go to rockauto.com, and whatever you buy there, make sure you let them know in the How You Heard About Us section that Locked On sent you, because if you don't, the rabbits will spoil how Stranger Things ends. Rock Auto, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Hey, that listener survey is still going. So if you're into a $100 Ticketmaster gift card, we got 10 of them that go out to some lucky random person who finishes the Locked On listener survey. Go to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. It's a survey for you to just let us know how we can be better. Let us know what you like and what you don't like about Locked On Podcasts. That's lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. And a few lucky winners will get $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. Once again, that's lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. Thanks so much for your help. Let me talk to you about Les Steckel. Look, if you're unfamiliar with the Les Steckel year, maybe you joined the Vikings fandom recently and you're not too familiar with what they did in the 80s, but if you were alive back then, it's probably seared into your head as the worst coach in Vikings history. That's probably fair. I mean, 1 year he went 3-13. All the other coaches that went 3-13 at least got more years, right? You could argue maybe Norm Van Brocklin because he didn't make the playoffs in 7 years. But I mean, Leslie Frazier had a 3-13 year. He made the play. I don't know. It's a different conversation. But what happened in that Les Steckel disaster, I think warrants another look, both because I think there's a lot more to say on this guy than really gets said. And shoot, it's also pretty dope story. So let me tell you a story. It starts in 1983. Bud Grant is mulling retirement. Now, the 83 season was sort of like the 2003 season. They started off 6-2, and then they sort of fell apart down the stretch. Tommy Kramer got hurt in that season. He was hurt a lot, and that was one of the seasons he was a little more hurt for, so there was a lot of Steve Dills in that season. And all in all, it was a season where they really felt kind of similarly to how they've felt the last couple of years, where man, they're on the cusp of being something. And they just this is not a disastrous organization. This is an organization that's a few tweaks away from really being there. This is kind of how they felt at the time. It's how Bud Grant felt at the time. And he thought that was a decent enough state to hand over the reins, to say he was ready to retire and he was ready to say, I'm done here. And hey, Mike Lynn, general manager at the time, let's talk retirement and terms and, let's get this done. I'm ready to hang him up. And Mike Lynn says, okay, well, let's start talking about your successor. Who do you like? And on the staff at the time was a total no-brainer answer in Jerry Burns. He was the offensive coordinator since 1968, all but the very first year of Bud Grant's tenure. He had orchestrated the offense entirely alone. Bud Grant was not an X's and O's guy. He was a people guy. He was a leadership guy. And so Jerry Burns, I mean, with Bud Grant having final say on things and all that stuff, but it was Jerry Burns did the work. He was the one that ran what they called at the time the pop gun offense. We would call it now the West Coast offense. And they all take credit for inventing the West Coast. It was the pop gun offense. And little pop gun passes, tiny little passes, right? West Coast, like what they did with Bill Walsh in San Francisco. And I mean, you think Chuck Foreman, you think Fran Tarkenton, you think if you want to go to Gene Washington or John Gilliam or Stu Voigt or any of those really cool players that we all have really fond memories of, well, those schemes were Jerry Burns. It was so easy. And the players loved him. They loved ragging on him. He was a funny guy and they loved playing pranks on him. They loved Jerry Burns. He was a total no-brainer answer. Also on that staff, Pete Carroll was on that staff. Floyd Reese, Mark Trestman, and Bud Grant in his book, his autobiography, he mentioned that those were the names that he put forth. He said, Jerry Burns is the guy, but these are some names too. Mike Lynn says, well, what do you think about Les Steckel? And that's really interesting. Les Steckel was a pretty good option, according to Bud at the time. He was a bright kid. He was younger at the time, and they had the Army thing in common. Bud Grant was a Navyman, and Les Steckel was a Marine. Bud Grant genuinely thought, yeah, that guy could do the job. I think, he cares about the players. He cares about, winning. He's got the right attitude, he thought. He said, yeah, I think that guy could do the job, and he's an innovator, bright kid, right? And Mike Lynn really liked Les Steckel. Mike Lynn really had I think a soft spot for him, or at least Bud Grant thought Mike Lynn had a soft spot for him. And so he went with Les Steckel, which Bud Grant did say, yeah, I signed off on that. I said that would be okay, but I probably should have pushed for Jerry Burns more, obviously, with how it turned out. And obviously it was a total disaster, but why it was a disaster is, I think, oversimplified. If you go read any articles from back then or ask anybody who was alive back then and remembers it, they'll say, well, he was just such a boot camp guy. He was such a Marine, and he ran it like boot camp and he was way too tough on the players and the players kind of got exhausted and they stopped having fun. And I think that's really important, and we'll circle back to that they did kind of stop having fun. That's probably the mistake that Les Steckel made, but it makes him out to be like a drill sergeant that, like this total tin pot dictator. And I just don't think that's fair. Les Steckel, I mean, look, nobody's ever what they were, 13 months of Les Steckel's life. He was the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. He's lived an entire life beyond that. He served in Vietnam. He has coached a bajillion other places beyond that. And there's a lot of other stories. So I want to tell you some Les Steckel stories that can get you to better understand who Les Steckel was. You're not going to walk away thinking he was secretly a good coach, because I don't think he was. I don't think he would tell you he was. But I think you'll have a better understanding of where he went wrong and what he was angling to do. And I think what he was angling to do was a really good idea, and he just went a little too far with it. And I think that will be something that you can apply to the Vikings today. And if that didn't make sense to you, just bear with me. You'll get it. First, let me talk to you about Grambling. If you want to Gramble on today's Vikings, you can do that. You can bet on their win totals. You can bet on week 1. You can bet on where they'll place in the division. You can bet on all that stuff at betonline.net. You can bet on the NBA Finals, the NHL. Are they in the finals yet? Probably not. You can bet on NHL playoffs, whatever they're playing, WNBA going strong, golf, tennis, even your favorite Vegas casino games. You just log right on and play. So go to betonline.net. You can build weird player prop parlays. You can bet in the middle of games with their live betting thing. It is just a haven for all things Grambling. So go to betonline.net, where the game starts. When Wade Wilson was a rookie, Wade Wilson, quarterback of the Vikings in the late 80s, backup for a long time, and then quarterbacked a few seasons with Tommy Kramer hurt. When Wade Wilson was a rookie, he almost didn't make the team. He could not, for the life of him, throw a spiral. Big problem, first camp. And they were going to cut him. And everybody knew this. And so the other quarterbacks on the team at the time got him like a book from Joe Namath that was supposed to, inspire him or something. And Les Steckel tells this story in a clinic he was giving to, I don't know where he was giving this clinic, but it was when he was with the Denver Broncos. He was after his time in Minnesota. He went as a position coach, and he was quarterback coach for John Elway for a little while. And it was during that time. And he was trying to get through to Wade Wilson to try to figure out what the deal with this is. And, I think nowadays a lot of players would just get cut. Kid can't throw a spiral, you're out of here. Sorry. And I think that's probably fair. I mean, like, you listen to my rhetoric around like Kellen Mond or something. He's like, I can't call the play, or Kyle Sloter. You can't call the plays in the huddle, can't be on the team. Oh, well. Les Steckel didn't see it that way. He was a lot more reluctant to give up. And I think a lot of position coaches will be like that, right? As a position coach, your job is not to figure out, your job in training camp is not to decide who's going to get cut for all of camp. That's your job at the very end. Maybe you spend one day and you give a recommendation to the head coach. But your job during camp is to get all 6 of these guys on the team. If you've got 6 running backs and they're going to keep 3, but your job is to get all 6 of these guys the best chance they could possibly have of getting on the team. And that's the way Les Steckel really looked at it. And so he takes Wade Wilson off to the side and he says, look, you and me, let's just throw the ball back and forth and talk. Just throw me some passes, right? Throw me passes the way you throw passes, and we'll just talk. So they're chit-chatting and stuff, and Steckel's watching these passes so hard that they're like hitting him in the face. Like, he's not even trying to catch him. He's just like watching the throwing motion really hard. And he's trying to figure out what's wrong. And it didn't seem like much was wrong. And he goes up, he says, wait, let me see how you're holding the ball. And if you've never been a quarterback at any level, and you throw a spiral, if you can throw a spiral, throw one, and then pay attention to which of your fingers are doing most of the work. And you'll find that your thumb is stabilizing and your middle finger is the one that really applies the rotational motion. And the other ones just sort of lay there. And when he looked at the way Wade Wilson gripped the ball, he was white-knuckling it. He had all of his fingers as tight as they possibly could be against that ball. And so when he would flick his wrist, all 4 fingers would act on it, and that wouldn't be smooth rotational motion. It was really chaotic, and they come out wobbly. And he says, loosen up your grip a little bit. Wade Wilson has like a 9-year career. So that's, I guess, the impact that I would prefer to remember Les Steckel over, rather than the time he was selected mainly out of the ill-gotten favors of like one dude who was the same guy that did the Herschel Walker trade, totally wasn't ready, and approached it in a way that you understand, but just didn't work, right? And for that, let me remind you. He talks about this. He doesn't talk about it a lot, but he did talk about this a little bit. And he says, look, I was a Vietnam guy. And when I got home from Vietnam and I was looking for a job, somebody said, football coaching. And I said, well, why would I do football coaching? And they started talking about like the camaraderie, this is a group of men kind of all achieving a common goal kind of thing that is very similar to the military. I mean, constructed after the military. Like the people, the John Heismans and stuff were all World War I vets who were constructing a lot of football after like militaristic traditions. And that camaraderie totally, I mean, anybody who's played sports can tell you about the camaraderie you have with your teammates, and anybody who's done like a tour of service can tell you about the camaraderie you have with people that you've been like in combat with, or even in boot camp with. And that camaraderie was really what drew Les Steckel to football. That the connections and the idea of helping each other grow. This is the part where I speculate, but I don't think many people would disagree. I think Les Steckel wanted to replicate that when he became head coach. He said, all right, the way I'm going to build this is I'm not going to take what Bud Grant did and just try to copy it. That's not me, right? And there's something fair to that, even though obviously everybody now thinks, well, you probably should have just kept all the Bud Grant traditions and captained the ship that was already built. But I think he wanted to build it his way. And as head coach, I think that's kind of fair. I mean, you wouldn't want Kevin O'Connell to come in and say, well, a lot of the Mike Zimmer things, really, I mean, they never lost more than, 8-9 games in a season. Like, they were never a double-digit loss team. They were pretty good. Keep all the traditions. Like, nobody would say this, right? So I get it. But he wanted to create the brotherhood kind of thing. And so I think that's why he made training camp so grueling. I don't know if it was like these kids aren't tough enough. Blah, blah. And, you hear some people, what was it, like Urban Meyer, who said after he got fired, like, well, the kids just weren't tough enough for what I put them through. Les Steckel doesn't say that. And I don't think he was trying to be like, it just needs to be the toughest. He wasn't doing the Joe Judge thing or the Brad Childress thing where it was just like, I just need you to go through enough pain so that you weed out the weak, blah, blah, blah. Or the Norm Van Brocklin was like this. Although Norm Van Brocklin literally had to like weed out the bartenders. So yeah. When Les Steckel talks about it, he's I wasn't ready. He says, I did that and it's not for me and I never want to do it again. And he never wants to coach again. Not because he had such a bad experience and he just never wants to, but because it's not for him. He's not a manager, right? He wants to take guys aside and figure out what's wrong with their spiral. He wants to get to know players. He wants to get players to grow. And that's why I think he's sitting there. I was so struck by this in this clinic, and I'll link it in the show notes if I remember to, but he was so excited to talk to people that were on a lower level. And then he says, remember, he's the quarterback's coach for John Elway. And he says, my dream is to coach a high school team. That's all he wants. He just wants to make kids grow up. And he did eventually coach a high school team, coach his son's high school team, and he coaches at a tiny little college now. But that's a man with a real love for exactly what he was doing, and head coaching isn't what he was doing. That said, what went wrong here? Well, he tried to make it boot camp, right? And he tried to put all these players through the ringer and said, look, if I can make you suffer together, you grow together. And by and large, I guess that's a little true. That is basically the idea behind like boot camp plus getting people into like conditioning shape. But he went way too hard with it. I mean, they were running up hills. They were climbing ropes. They had Ironman competitions. There was a player who was climbing a rope in front of fans for an Ironman competition as an exhibition, and he fell and broke his ankle. And I don't know if that guy ever played again. They had players quitting in the middle. Like, he went way too hard with it. And he literally made it military, Marine-ass boot camp. If you know any Marines in your life, ask them about boot camp and ask them if, and decide if that sounds like a normal NFL training camp. And this is like what he put those players through. It was a bad idea. And by like week 5 or 6, they were all broken. Their bodies were broken. Their spirits were broken. And they just gave up on the season. They went 3-13. The last 2 games, they lost like 50-7. Like, it was horrible. And it didn't work out. And he says, 13 months of my life, I did it, and I'm never doing it again. But I don't think it's fair for a guy whose only goal in his whole career right now is to grow close to people and to help them become more than they were before they met him. I don't think it's fair that a guy like that gets remembered for the worst 13 months of his career. And that's, I guess, the whole reason I'm doing this show the way it is. But we can also learn from this, right? The thing that really did those Vikings in, they were in decent shape. They got a little bit too brutalized, but that's an easy adjustment, right? Dial it back next year. But what really happened was they stopped having fun. in the 60s and 70s, early 80s, and they had fun. They played stupid games and pranks on each other all the time. I mean, they pranked Bud Grant. Like, even the stoic Ice Master himself, they would pull a little joke on here or there. Or Jerry Burns, they would play pranks on each other. The coaches would play pranks back on them. It was fun. Everybody was getting along and having a good time, and it was fun. Football is supposed to be fun. And we forget that, I think, as fans sometimes, too. We get all wrapped up in what's the DVOA of this, and is it worth the cap number, and did he generate enough WAR or whatever. We get so wrapped up in that, or the fantasy stats. Is he going to be the right ADP today? That fantasy takes all the fun out of football for me now. And even the scheme stuff, he ran X stick, double clutch, whatever. And, and that can be fun until it starts feeling like work. And then you feel like it's something you got to prove. And forget it, man. It's supposed to be fun. It's a game, and if we can still find a way to have fun, especially when the team isn't very good, which, look, the team is in a pretty dark patch right now, right? Like, they're not Super Bowl contenders, and they probably won't be for a while. That's okay. Because they can still be fun. And I think if they're fun, I'm going to have an easy time coming on here every Monday morning and talking to you about whatever the Sunday game was. So I will leave you with this, a challenge. Go find that Les Steckel clinic. I'll link it in the show notes, and if I forget to link it in the show notes, just search Les Steckel on YouTube, you'll find it. See if you can't learn something about quarterbacking from Les Steckel. If you can allow yourself to learn something from the agreed upon, unanimous, worst coach in Vikings history, then I think you have the right mindset here. And if you go, Les Steckel, I ain't gonna learn anything from him, he sucks, then I want you to really interrogate what that means, what you think that means about you, and what you think that means about him. I'll leave you with that. Tomorrow is Twitter Tuesday, so you can ask me questions, whatever. You can send them to me at LukeBraunNFL or at LockedOnVikings. You can also send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com, or just leave a YouTube comment if you're watching on YouTube, or there's a Google form in the show notes as well. Check out the Locked On NFL podcast. You can find me on that tomorrow as well. Every Tuesday, me and Ross talk about whatever. I might make him listen to history stuff. I might talk about the USFL or something. I don't know. I'll see what horrors I bring to that show. I'll see you there. And as always, Skull.